Welcome to Brutally Honest Talk Radio. This is Elmo the Conservative, your host, and thank you for joining us, everybody, for another great show. Have another great guest in the studio on the show today. This is William R. Douglas. He is the author of a book called "The Sum of All Our Anger: Civil War 2.0." So, what a great time to discuss such a topic, and he's going to talk about his book. So thank you, William, for being on the show. And how are you doing today? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Elmo. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on and let's have a great time there discussing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm from Detroit. You sound like you're from somewhere in the Midwest. So where exactly you reside?
You poor Tiger fans, I felt bad for you. But
Yeah, by Cleveland.
yeah, I'm northwest of Chicago, about an hour, a small town called McHenry.
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah. And we're getting into my favorite season now, fall. We're starting to cool off. So, as I stated in the intro, you are the author of a book, "The Sum of All Our Anger."
Cool.
Just go ahead and hit the key points that you want to talk about first, that are in the book, and mainly what the book is about.
Sure. So the book starts in the year 2061, and the backdrop is that all the craziness that we have going on now continues for another 37 years. And it gets amplified, and the anger that we currently have continues to build and build, and finally the proverbial pressure cooker finally blows. So a first truly openly socialist slash Marxist president takes the oath of office in January of 2061, and he very quickly, through executive order, starts making all these changes and trying to dismantle the constitutional republic and trying to create a new socialist utopia under something
Yes.
called the New Way. Very interesting. When I was writing this book, I coined the phrase New Way last August, and it was really eerie about a month ago to see candidate Kamala Harris unveil a lot of her campaign stops, these big posters that said, New Way Forward. I was like, whoa.
And let me mention, I just saw within the last few days something about the history of Mao Zedong and communist countries, as far as them telling the people, Lenin and Mao Zedong telling the people that you will be unburdened as we go
Yes,
forward. And so this
yes,
is something that she has said on
yes.
multiple occasions, unburdened by what has been.
What has
So
been,
the
yes.
bad parts of the past and history, that's going to
Uh-huh.
go away, because there is
Yeah,
something new under the sun, and we're going to
yeah.
present it to you now in a shoebox garden.
Uh-huh. Yeah, another eerie thing. There were a lot of times when I was writing the manuscript when I started last summer where a news story would come up that in some or in part had direct tie-ins to the plot line that was already in the manuscript or was already in the outline coming up. And it was happening so frequently that I decided to keep a folder. And when I finished up the manuscript, as kind of an afterthought, I put a whole section, a couple pages worth of link at the back, very back of the novel, where the reader can go and look at some of these stories.
Right.
And of course, when they see them, they're going to immediately know that because of what they just read, that oh wow, that was in the book. And I was very purposeful in making those links with non-Fox News sources because half the populace doesn't trust Fox News. So I'm like, all right, I use legacy media sources that the other side, if they should happen to come across and read the book, that they will see that the stories are legit. They're not just some crazy thing in their mind that's been made up, which of course are not made up.
What's the most recent thing that you've seen in real day life and politics and in social unrest that you had put in your book, an element
Yeah,
in the story?
one item that was in the book very early on, somewhat of a spoiler alert, but it's a bit part in the book was the cancellation of the Electoral College. I also mentioned the phrase "new way" because in the book there's two thoughts, two viewpoints on the country: the new way, which is the socialist slash Marxist ideology that's currently the rage among some of the elites and certainly on some of the liberal college campuses. And then the old way. The old way are those patriotic Americans that subscribe to a conservative uh, ideology, constitutionalists. Many of them are Christians. A fair number that aren't, but many of them are Christian. But in the book, the leader, the president, the new president, has taken the term "old way" and turned it into a pejorative. So for half the country that is all excited about this new way ideology. The old way comprises the basket of deplorables and the flyover country and all the other derogatory terms that have been thrown at conservatives over the last several years.
And I noticed that there was mostly a talk of getting rid of the Electoral College after the 2016 election where Trump beat
Yeah.
Hillary because she had the majority of the popular votes. So because of that, people are talking about making it go away, which I'm okay with that. That can happen, but you can't make it retroactive and try to go back and change something. Or we have to have one system and stick to it. Maybe we can stick with the popular vote or the electoral college for 50 years at a time, and then when that period is up, then discuss, if we want to keep going the same way. But you can't go back and change the results because the person that you voted for didn't win.
Yeah.
It's got to be in place and understood before people cast their ballots. This is the system we're going to use this time. Those are the kind of things that can stir people up and set a fire under a pot.
Yeah, I guess I'm still a fan of the brilliance behind the Electoral College because when you go back and read the founding fathers and their reasoning for it, the primary reason was to not allow big concentrations of population centers to lord it over the rest of the folks out in small towns and definitely out in the rural areas. I think if you get really electoral college, you could see a scenario where the dense population centers in the east and particularly the northeast and certainly on the west coast, particularly California, could literally lord it over almost the rest of the entire country. I think that's a very dangerous thing that we have to really think through very carefully. Quite frankly, getting really electoral college is no easy task. You'd have to, pass some kind of an amendment to repeal it, which would have to be voted on and passed by 2/3 of the states.
Sure.
So a very difficult task.
Sure. And the mob rule side of democracy, the threat of that, and to keep that in check, where the majority does rule. But like you just explained so well, you have these clusters of people in big parts of the country that could end up ruling over the whole country, including the flyover states and everything.
Sure.
So I
Sure.
think it has served well and worked well. And I wish people knew more about the system and how the electoral college is. So like I said, I'm from Detroit but live in Atlanta, Georgia, just being one example. Let's say that the majority of votes went to one candidate from Atlanta, Augusta, and Macon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you look over the whole state, then there's a consistent voting for the other candidate spread out.
Yeah. Right.
And so in that case, the electoral college, my understanding, they look at it and say, okay, this state, not 2 or 3 cities, but the whole state really needs to go to the person who's spread out over
Mm-hmm.
8 cities, north, south,
Mm-hmm.
east, and west
Mm-hmm.
in the state, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just looking at the majority when they turn out to be dots on the map.
Sure. And essentially, that's what happens to the new president in my novel. Is the character's name is Devin Cyrus, and he wins, the vast majority of the population centers up and down the eastern seaboard and the west coast. And that's how he becomes president, was over, via a simple majority. And when the founders were discussing what form of government they wanted, they looked at the French system of democracy and they realized that it had an inherent danger, and they called it the tyranny of the majority. What they're referring to was a simple majority. So that's when they said, I think we should go with a constitutional republic. And then a constitutional republic, you need a 2/3 majority in order to get legislation passed. And so I think that's one of the beauties of our Constitution, is that it requires a supermajority in order to move the ship of state down any particular path when it comes to laws that affect the citizens from coast to coast and obviously in the middle.
Yeah. And William, your political position or political lean is to the right. Are you more on the conservative side yourself?
Yes, definitely. I would definitely categorize myself as a conservative. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, I'm aware of, you offline we were talking about the movie The Civil War, and that movie that came out this spring essentially offers up a right-wing takeover of the country, but it's an extreme right wing. And so the two states in the movie that come to the rescue, quote unquote, is Texas and California. And they're the ones that are going to come and save the nation from these fascists that are that have taken over the White House and the country. I don't see the threat of fascism as the biggest threat. I'm convinced that the bigger threat is from the extreme left. I do believe that extremists within the Democratic Party that are truly Marxist/socialists have really infiltrated the party to the point where you can draw an analogy to the proverbial Trojan horse. They're using a one-story political party until they come to such a point of power that they no longer need the true patriotic Democrats, and will easily cast them off in order to try and turn the country into a socialist.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe that Barack Obama was a socialist. And people hear the words like socialist and communist without really knowing what they are, or it's
Yeah,
considered a dirty word. It's
yeah,
real and honest and
sure,
what he is. And he knew that the Socialist Party didn't have enough traction or popularity for him to come to power that way. So he
right,
came through the Democrat Party, which is
sure,
not as far left, but they compromise and get in bed with each other and make deals and say, okay, we want you to be okay with this, to shut down a Christian celebration or convention at the White House, but want you to celebrate Ramadan. And
yeah,
then
right,
you can go ahead and you can push for the socialized health care, socialized health insurance, and what you want to do about spreading the wealth around and
sure,
raising the capital gains tax and things that kind of
sure,
anti-capitalist and work
yeah,
against the country.
right, right,
And now the Democrats have Obama touring around yelling at people, trying to yell people into voting for Kamala
yeah,
Harris
correct.
because of her actually losing traction.
Yeah, and even worse is, telling them that because they're a certain skin color, therefore they must vote a certain way, which is absurd.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
shameful.
And and when we try to get people to understand what is socialism or Marxism like, of course we like to bring up the example of Soviet Union, East Germany, North Korea, all of whom failed or are actively failing, like North Korea. Cuba, of course, is a good reference point. But an even more modern reference point here in our hemisphere of a sizable nature is Venezuela. What has happened down there? They were once one of the most wealthiest South American countries in the
Right.
hemisphere. And when Hugo Chavez came along, he says, "Yeah, we're going to make this socialist utopia." Of course, he gets sick and dies, and then this other guy comes in, Maduro. Uh, you know, they, the policies have totally upended the country so much that their GDP has collapsed over the last decade. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. That happens because of policy that
Right.
affects the engine of commerce and of course what was capitalism, but it's now been destroyed. And is it any wonder that you know tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans have tried to, in some respects, successfully snuck across our southern border because there's no life for them in Venezuela. The place is just totally down the toilet. And so that you know people need to wake up and realize that the socialist threat is real. And we have these modern examples that show what can happen if you
Yep.
allow these policies to push out of the way, some or all of capitalism, push out of the way free speech, push out of the
Right.
way, a constitutional republic. I was writing the book
Yes.
last year. There was a story that came up. I couldn't believe it. It was a New York Times opinion piece written by two professors, law professors from Harvard Law School and Yale University Law School. And the name of the opinion piece was, quote, "The Constitution is broken. It cannot be fixed," unquote. And I was like, what? I mean, I thought we fixed the Constitution via amendments.
Right.
This
Right.
idea that you somehow can't fix the Constitution, which I argue, I don't believe the Constitution is broke. But their argument is just an example of this far left extremism that has invaded our higher institutions of learning and is having a very negative and detrimental effect on the young minds that are going there, and eventually will come out and be leaders in the community, leaders in government, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. Yes, it's unfortunate. There's been so much talk. Me and Inger talk about sometimes how the left shotguns these lies so that so many come at you at one time. It's hard to
Yes,
keep up
yes,
with so many of them.
correct,
So
correct.
if you just look at one example with the debate between Waltz and J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris and him, they're talking about kicking people off of social media and controlling speech. And so, and he's like, look, yeah, I didn't make this. I didn't create this, but it is the law. With the
Yeah,
First Amendment, we have free speech. And so
yes,
once he
right.
comes back and says, yeah, that's right. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I'm like, are you saying that because you really believe that's the danger of, that's the same as censorship? Or you saying it because you really, you're just lying?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
people need to understand that's not
yes,
what it is. Something is
correct.
going to physically harm or physically affect someone else. But I think that if there were actually a fire in a crowded theater, I think it's okay to alert people to that. But for there to be no fire, and just because someone is malicious and wants to cause a stampede and for people to get trampled, that is there's no right for that in the
Correct,
Constitution. But
correct,
what they want to do, like many people on the left, is silence those that disagree with them.
correct.
And they have their own version and their own definition of what the truth is and true information.
Yeah. Yeah, when you go back and look at the history of like all the Vietnam War protests in the mid to late '60s, especially late '60s, and it's fascinating to see that the left at that time were such huge proponents for free speech.
Right.
They wanted their voices heard and they demanded free, which obviously they were getting it because they were covering these protests in the news. To think that some of those people went on into academia, went on into government, and now, either them or their offspring are arguing that, we need to censor uh, the media. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And it's one of the dangers, again, coming back to the book, is that's in the book where the press is definitively censored, and one particular on-air host is all of a sudden just disappears, and you'll have to read
Yeah.
the book to see what happens to her.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the left in the 60s during Vietnam protests, they wanted their voices heard, and they were
Yeah,
also anti-war.
yeah,
They
yeah,
weren't pushing for soldiers to go overseas, or definitely
sure,
not for us to be given billions of dollars to help
sure,
other people when there's clearly disasters and crises that are going on here.
sure.
Tell me, what do you think there is the possibility of there being a civil war in our time, and like within the next year or so. And I'm saying that because there's an election coming up, and there's wild and emotionally heightened people on both sides.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, if you could just give your opinion on, the probability of that, or if someone were to be successful in taking out Trump, God forbid,
Yeah,
would that set anything off?
yeah. Well, obviously there's going to be two scenarios that are going to, compete for one another, and only one of them is going to win out on election day. The first scenario, Kamala wins. I don't see the right wing, even, especially the extreme right wing. I don't see the extreme right wing rising up and trying to start some kind of, revolution, insurrection, civil war, whatever you want to call it. I don't see that happening. I think they'll be upset. I just don't see the kind of violence coming from that wing of our political spectrum so much as you see from the other wing, which what they have proven time and time again that the extreme left wing has no qualms about engaging in violence. My concern would be that President Trump is elected, which I hope he is. He's got my vote. That the extreme left wing, because of this whole brainwashing that's going on, that this is somehow the last chance for democracy, which is, that's a whole nother discussion. But if he were to win, I can see the extreme left wing getting very violent. I can see them attempting to try and occupy the space around the White House, maybe even the Capitol, in some kind
Mm.
of vain attempt to keep Trump from, the inauguration or occupying the White House as the lawfully elected president. I can certainly see that happening. I can certainly see all kinds of riots and protests going on all over the country, especially in the university settings, and potentially not a very good situation. At the end of the day, of course, any kind of violence, no matter what side it comes from, was going to have to be put down in order to restore law and order. We have to be a law and order country. The moment we stop being a law and order country, then, do we even have a country anymore? And of course we
It's
don't.
anarchy. Yeah. Wild West.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
So, but
And
long term,
yeah,
certainly
go ahead.
long term, there's a real danger that the anger that has welled up on both sides of the aisle, and we all have our reasons on the conservative side why we're angry and upset. They have their reasons, okay? And unless something comes along to intercept the trajectory of the country, something has to come along and intercept that trajectory. It's
Right.
only, in my view, its only logical endpoint would be a civil conflict to one degree or another. And
Right.
that's a frightening scenario. I have 8 grandkids, a ninth one on the way. I
Oh,
want
wow.
them to live in quiet harmony amongst their fellow citizens.
Sure, sure. And we made reference not only to your book, which I want people to get that, pick it up and read it, the Sum of All Our Anger, but also the movie that came out this year, Civil War. And
Yeah.
there's a part of the movie where these reporters, they're traveling and they come through some small town. They come through mid-America,
Mm-hmm.
and people are walking around free, and they go in a store, things are open, and they just they said that they're not getting involved. They're independent or center or whatever. And so they don't want to be part of either state,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people like that. But they showed that when they went outside that store, there were snipers on the rooftops of some of the
Yeah.
buildings still.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like you can't be in a country and not be a part of it. You can't be a separatist
Yeah.
because eventually when the dust kicks up, everybody's choking on it.
Yeah. Correct. And eventually, the way things are going, unless there is that intercept of the trajectory, eventually you come to a point where people have to choose sides, and that's a
Yeah.
very dangerous point in time when you have to choose sides. Um, the other thing I saw the movie too that you're referencing, and there were some very subtle underpinnings in the plot line that were somewhat disturbing. One was the president depicted in the movie had a hair thing going on. They didn't try to make him look like Trump facially, but definitely the character had a wild hair thing going on. And at the very end of the movie, a very disturbing scene. I don't know if I should spoil it or not, but a very disturbing scene. There's the part of the scene. There's a character. He doesn't have a speaking part, but he looks awfully similar to Jared Kushner. The president's
Okay.
son-in-law.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why he can't speak. We'll leave it at that. But yeah, it was very, very disturbing movie. To me, it was a repudiation of conservatism, just all lumped together. That all the conservatives are the bad people in the room. They're going to destroy the country, and we, the liberals from California and Texas, are going to come and rescue the country. That was I think the driving plot line that I got out of the movie.
Well, I got the feeling that they tried to stay neutral and kind of look at the effects that would happen to people, which is the country being torn up and burned by them having the main characters be the journalists, and they don't say what their leans are, but you see people like Jesse Plemons, the Army soldier or sergeant who has red sunglasses. I don't
Yes,
know if that's
correct. Yeah,
symbolic
yeah,
of
right,
anything.
right,
But
right.
that asks these people of different ethnicities, what kind of American
Right.
are you? You know.
Right.
But then with basically this, I can't remember the name of the group, but there was, on one side there the name for the army. Like I got the feeling
Yeah,
the army had
yeah,
divided into two sides,
correct.
to
Which
support.
also happens in my book. There's a
Yeah,
point in time where, up and down the line from the private citizen on up all the way to the Pentagon, people had to
right.
choose sides. And we saw that happen in the first Civil War. The
Yes,
generals of that era had to choose sides, and a lot of them
right.
chose their loyalty to Virginia, like Lee, or their loyalty to the South, like many of the
Sure,
other ones did.
sure did. Yeah, they had their own president picked out, and they were ready to
Yeah.
start another country.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead.
well, just wanted to say, of course, we're conservative, and I'm also a Christian, which I think a
Sure.
lot of conservatives are. I
Myself.
think of conservative is short for Christian conservative
Yeah.
because the values and the freedoms and everything that we want line up with the Bible. And I would even
Sure.
argue that God is a capitalist, the way that he multiplies things,
Sure.
when you plant seeds. But
Sure.
but I believe that people should pray, be a law-abiding citizen. Violence is never right or acceptable unless it is in self-defense,
Yeah.
and we just need to pray. I believe that I'm 55 years old. I've seen a lot of presidents. I believe that Biden is the worst president of my lifetime, and I know something about history too, so we can go back even further than that. But even so, I've still prayed for Biden uh, on occasion because he's a president.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'll let you kind of end it, but this is my last comment, is that whenever someone gets in office who is not the one that I voted for, the very first thought that I have is, I hope that they do well.
Sure.
I hope that they would, now that they have, manifested what politics is, which is the acquisition of power or the maintenance of power. Now that
Hmm.
they have control of the White House, I hope that they would use that power in a good way, because I live here. I'm not going to be like Bill Maher and hope that I hope that there's inflation and that there's job loss and that all these things happen just so that they don't get reelected.
Correct.
I want people to do well. And a good government is a government that steps back and gets out of the way when it
Yeah,
can run kind of on cruise control and be a well-oiled machine.
I agree. 100%.
But, that's my there's nothing that we can do about it. People can try to fight and combat, the claim of an election being stolen and all of that. That would take a lot of time. At least, in January and probably the first year, no matter what happens, that's who the president is going to be. I don't want them to
Mhm.
get into war with another country. And I want them
Yeah,
to make good decisions that affect everybody,
yeah,
regardless of their idealism and the things that they say that, their side can rah-rah and cheer for.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, go ahead, William.
yeah, 100%. You mentioned the faith element, and yeah, there is a faith element in my story because I'm a man of faith myself as a follower of Christ. But the faith element is there. It's not proselytizing or over overwhelming. Because I wanted the novel to appeal to a larger audience, regardless of political persuasion. Because the goal of the writing the novel really is threefold. Number one, it was to serve as a warning to the country that we're on a dangerous path. We need to figure out how to relearn the art of agreeing to disagree and still being
Yes.
family and neighbors and friends and coworkers and even congregants. Part two, or second point, was to hopefully get people to realize that the Democratic Party does have embedded within itself a Trojan horse, a real proverbial Trojan horse, and that they need to be expelled from the party without question. And the third point really would be to point the reader back to our common Judeo-Christian faith that was so important in the bulk of our country's history, but which currently is increasingly becoming, maligned and forgotten and disparaged. And so those are the three main goals of the book.
All right, good deal. Hey, thank you so much for being on Brutally Honest Talk Radio. Is there anything you want to tell people about where they can follow you on social media, and definitely where they can pick up your book, the easiest place they could buy it online?
Sure, the best way is to follow me is to go to author williamrdouglas.com. Real easy, author williamrdouglas.com. There's links there out to the book. The book's currently on sale at Amazon up until Election Day. The EPUB is 99 cents. The paperback is $16.95 on Amazon. After Election Day, it'll go up, but right now it's on sale.
Huh.
I hope your listeners will give it a shot and hopefully leave some good positive reviews to help spread the word.
Yes, great. Thank you again, William. Everyone, leave your comments or questions in the chat. You can also follow us
There it
always
is.
on Facebook. Here's a picture of the cover of that great book with a picture of the Capitol on it. And
The
anger,
mysterious flag, a mysterious flag. You'll have to read about the flag. So, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Just on Facebook, people can follow us. You can email us at bruthonest@gmail.com if you want to send me a message directly. And you can also catch this podcast not only on YouTube for the video, but iTunes, Amazon, and Spotify to catch the
Great,
podcast. So,
great.
right, everybody, take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, Elmo. Thanks again for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
You're welcome, William. Bye now.